Our gospel this morning is according to Mark in the 8th chapter. Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi, and on the way he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they answered him, "John the Baptist, and others Elijah, and still others one of the prophets." He asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter answered him, "You are the Messiah." And he sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. And then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering, and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he said all of this to them quite openly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." He called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If anyone wants to become my follower, let them deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the gospel's sake will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed, when he comes in the glory of his Father with his holy angels." And this is the gospel of the Lord. Take a look at your front bulletins, please, if you would. What are you reading there? What are the big words on the front cover of the bulletin? Someone tell me? What? Who do you say I am? It's quite different from playing a name game with the kids, because this is not asking a question about who Jesus is. They know him by name. They could say, Jesus Bar Joseph, son of Joseph, Jesus of Nazareth, any one of those things. But when you say a question like, "Who do you say I am?" it goes beyond just a formal name given to you at birth. And so if I'm standing here and I'm looking down at Marty and I say to you, "Who are you?" I'm not asking for Marty's name. And so he might stop for a minute and say, "Oh, I'm Anne's husband." And I look at him and say, "No, you're not." And you look at me confused and say, "Well, I'm the treasurer of St. Luke's." And I just look at you and I say, "No, you don't." If that sounds ridiculous, then you're seeing exactly what's going on in this morning's gospel. You see, because Jesus goes along and he says to the people, "Who do you say I am?" And they're guessing. They know it's important, like a prophet, maybe like Elijah or John the Baptist, who had recently been beheaded. Perhaps he's come to life again in the form of Jesus, or some other prophet. But then he asks squarely to his disciples, and Peter, who was always the first to open his mouth, says, "You are the Messiah." Now, that word has loaded implications, because what a Messiah is clear in Peter's mind. He has learned from all of the Old Testament and from the oral traditions that if Jesus is the Messiah, something wonderful is going to happen, among which is we'll get rid of Rome, there will be peace again, we'll have the temple to ourselves, he will become our leader and our king, we will have nothing to fear from outside foreign forces. Not only does he believe it, he takes Jesus away from the disciples to tell him how wrong Jesus is about being a suffering Messiah. It's kind of like me taking Marty aside after he tells me all the truths of his life, and I say, "It's not true. You're not his husband. You're not the treasurer of this church. And he's looking at me like I'm crazy. Imagine the scene after Jesus proclaims himself to be a person that's going to be rejected, that's going to suffer, to be killed. And Peter says, you don't quite get it, do you, Jesus? This is not a Messiah. Obviously, you, Jesus, don't know your Old Testament all that well. So let me help you, Jesus, by letting you know what a Messiah is. And what's worse is he proceeds to do it. And with that, Jesus turns away and he looks over at the disciples, Peter standing right next to him, and he goes, get behind me, Satan. This is not fun for Peter. And then he goes on to say, what you're doing is setting your mind not on divine things, but the way you see them being brought out and used and exploited in human beings. That's the type of Messiah you want, and it's exactly the type of Messiah you're not going to get. Now, here it is embedded in a historical time. Jesus is out at Caesarea Philippi, which is out far away from where he normally goes. And he asks this question, who do you say I am? He gets an answer from Peter. Right answer, wrong description. So, here we are 2,000 years later, and you just looked at the front cover of this morning's bulletin, didn't you? And what were the words you read?
Who do you say?
Who do you say I am? And in saying those words, you are saying that you might have an answer. But the problem is your response as problematic as Peter's. It's very easy when we're brought up in all of this. You see, with Peter and the disciples, there are hints that are given. I mean, Peter and the disciples have seen Jesus doing very things. He's seen sick people get well. He's seen people turn aside from sinful ways and following him. It all looks good. It all looks like a prophet is on their heels. This is going to look good. And not only that, they got in early on the whole game. They're the ones that understood. And Peter supposedly understood the best because while the rest of them are standing having no answer to the question of who do you think I am, Peter pipes up immediately, you're the Messiah. That's who you are, yes sirree. But wait, what's this stuff about suffering? What's this stuff about dying? What's all this stuff about crucifixion? What's all this stuff about resurrected? It doesn't make any sense any more than me to face Marty this morning and say, anything you have to tell me is untrue. Who's right in this situation, me or Marty? Who's right in this situation, Peter or Jesus? And so when you look at the front cover of that bulletin and you read those words, who do you say I am? It's demanding an answer from you, just as it demanded an answer from the disciples. The real problem is that we who have been brought up, but since we are very little hearing all these Gospels, always think we have the answer. But you know, time takes its toll. And after a while, the edges of who we are get ground down. We want maybe a Jesus who really isn't all that into suffering, because suffering isn't what we're about. We run from suffering, and idea of putting a cross on our shoulders, I mean, pick up your cross and follow me, this is not in our mind. It really is not. I am willing to bet that right along with you, I would include myself, I would much prefer a Jesus that makes me feel good. And that's the whole problem of where Christianity has sooner or later dissolved itself. It wants that type of situation that says, I come out of church and I'm just so happy. I got Jesus in my life. Did I say the accent right? I'm from the north. I got to say this one. Imaha. Tell me if I'm wrong. I'm new to some. But that's not where it really is, and you know it. Sooner or later, we have to face the loss of the people that we love. Sooner or later, we have to look at ourselves squarely in the mirror and say, this is not a fun time. This is not an amusement park that we built over our heads here this morning. There are going to be those moments in time in which we have to pick up the cross and follow Christ. And there are people in this church that are doing it right now. You may not know about them, but I do. And at this moment in time, you may be feeling awfully good and life is going your way, but you are infinitely tied to the people of this church. And as a result, whether you want it or not, you have to carry their cross with them. That's just the way it is. What do you become to be my disciple? You must pick up your cross and follow me. And at any given time, like Simon of Cyrene, on Jesus' journey to Golgotha, there is the reality that we may also have to pick up the cross of other people's lives when they can no longer get up out of the dust. That is what a church is. And that is what people want to see sooner or later when they walk through the doors of this church. I am not sure, you see, if somebody is searching for the depths of life or meaning to life, that they're going to come into St. Luke and say, make me happy. What they're going to say is, can you tell me why any of us take up time and space? Can you give me a rationale as to why I even exist? Can you talk to me something deep? Can you tell me who I am? And the way we answer that question to that person coming through the door, it says to us, can you tell me who I am? We need to be able to say, it's interesting that you say that because there is a section in Mark's Gospel, chapter 8, I believe, in which that same question was posed to Jesus' disciples. And they got it all wrong. But if you want to stay with us, we will struggle with you because we struggle sometimes with that same question in our own lives. And if you stay with us, we will be the people who will struggle to answer that with you, even if it means carrying your cross or you carrying ours. But in so doing, we shall become what you can only call authentic Christians. That there will be those moments in time where we will smile, we will be happy, but we will not pretend to be happy when there's something going on that is deep within our soul. There will be a sense of honesty. Jesus was looking for a sense of honesty to understand, for his disciples to understand, but he just couldn't get it. So I think maybe what we always struggle with is kind of maybe take this Sunday's bulletin and hang it, put it in your house somewhere where you will pass by it once a day at least. And when you read the words, who do you say I am? It'll jog your memory and say, do I see Christ as Christ saw himself? Or have I created another type of Messiah? After all, Peter wasn't any stronger or weaker than the rest of us, and he had Jesus right there in front of his eyes. So, how we answer that question, who do you say I am, ultimately results in how we do our ministry here in that church. And if we move along with the answer that Jesus gave, then we'll discover what it really means to be authentic Christians. In those moments of rejoicing, in those moments of absolute sorrow, in the midst of all life, which is exactly what Jesus walked into so we would understand that God understands who we are. So, want to get on with it? It's September. We've got all our committees going, don't we? We've got our choir back together. We've got education going. We've got evangelism, worship, and music. We have all kinds of things going, and embedded in every one of those activities, in the bread and the wine that we bring up to this altar this morning, we should know, in some shape or form, what Jesus meant when he asked that question, who do you say I am? And as a collective voice, we'll be able to respond to the world. We know Christ as he described himself, even though we struggle to get rid of those things that we want to describe him as out of our own weakness. Now, does this have to be morose? No, it can be a darn fun thing. It can be lots of fun. It's always fun when you rediscover